Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or a passionate member of your faith community, this podcast is designed to challenge, inspire, and equip you with the tools you need for impactful ministry. And now for a little bit about the guest for this episode.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, Loren Richmond Jr. is in conversation with Tanita Tualla Maddox. Tanita is the National Director for Generational Impact for Young Life and serves as an Associate Regional Director in the Mountain West Young Life region. With an expertise in contextualizing the gospel for Gen Z, Tanita has been featured on the Holy Post podcast and has been published in the Great Commission Research Journal, the Journal of Youth and Theology, and more. She has served as Young Life leader with adolescents for over 26 years and serves as a volunteer Young Life leader in her local community. She lives in Washington with her husband and 2 children. A reminder before we start today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share Future Christian with a friend. Connect with Loren, Martha, and Future Christian on Instagram. Shoot us an email at loren@resonatemediapro.com with comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes. We appreciate your voice and how we faithfully discern the future of the church.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. My name is Loren Richmond Jr., and I am pleased to be joined today by Tanita Maddox. Hello, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, looking forward to this conversation. We've been trying to make this work for a little while, and yeah, grateful we could finally connect here. So fingers crossed that there's no crazy weather or snowstorms or, ice storms or whatever, and we'll record without interruption. We'll see. My dogs will probably sneak up and want some attention, but we'll make the best of it. Share, if you would, just a little bit about your background, your faith journey, what that's looked like in the past and what that looks like today.
Well, I am a second-generation Young Life kid, meaning my dad had a Young Life leader, met the Lord through Young Life, and then I got to grow up in a Christian home because of that. And Young Life ended up being the place where my faith became alive, where it got its legs, where I saw my friends meet the Lord, and am still involved today because it's the place where I see people move from death to life right in front of my eyes. And it happens to be the place where Jesus has taught me the most about who he is and who I am in him. And so I continue to be there.
Awesome. In your work with youth, I'm curious, how do you, I usually ask folks about spiritual practices, but I'm curious, how do you coach youth or mentor youth, disciple youth around spiritual practices these days?
In very, very concrete terms. So I think we've taken for granted that a lot of these ideas, hey, give it to God or just forgive them. Forgiveness, that's an abstract idea. And we're most of our young people have grown up in what's called a post-Christian culture. There is no context for what these things mean. So we go down very, very practical, very concrete. So even as we're teaching our high school students, where I lead, how to pray, we give them prompts on how do you pray for your friends? How do you pray for kids at your school? And we'll give them actual prompts so it can get their brain going. And what does it look like to pray for somebody else?
Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about that. I'm glad you're hinting at that because we'll talk. I'm looking forward to talking more about that. Anything else you want us to share about spiritual practices for yourself that you find meaningful either?
Oh, I'm a mom. I'm a working mom. And so the spiritual practices have been expressed in so many different ways, from when I was single and had all the time to myself, to being married with no kids, and again, having quiet in my house, to having newborns, to today. And I'm just grateful that there's actually not one or two spiritual practices to engage with, but many. And I would say Richard J. Foster's Celebration of Discipline, really, I read that when I was in college and continued to go back to it to pull out different disciplines at different times that meet me where I am in my stage of life.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing that. Well, we're here to talk with Tanita about her book, what Gen Z really wants to know about God. And I've got to give a shout out off the top here to my Canadian listeners and Canadian co-host who would say, Martha, who would say Gen Z. But down here in the States, we call it Gen Z. But let's talk. I mean, there's so much conversation right now about Gen Z and their faith, about quiet revivals or not happening. I mean, there's so much. So kind of set this scene, I suppose. I mean, you're someone who works with young people. Set the scene about what Gen Z or Gen Z looks like, what their faith looks like, or lack of faith looks like. You've already hinted at some of it, but set that stage here for us.
Well, if you use the birth years of 1997 to 2012, those are widely accepted birth years for Gen Z or Gen Z. And I wouldn't say not just in the U.S., but globally, they're using those years to talk about who Gen Z is. They're described as digital natives, so access to smart and interactive technology from a very young age, tablets, smartphones. That has been a part of their life from a young age. They're used to that world. They're very comfortable in that world. They understand that it has its own culture, but it's not separate from real life. The digital life and the physical world blend together for them. And then we've seen globally also that with this generation, as they've gotten older, they brought, or what came with them was a wave of mental health difficulties and challenges that we are still trying to figure out and is also bleeding into the generation after them right now. As far as faith is concerned, it's really hard to get a read on what's going on in the news. I would say this year specifically, right? 2025 to right now, there's been a lot of stuff that has come out. And it's really hard to see what's happening in the, public space. Because even I read an article that came out of the UK last week that said a survey said that Gen Z was the most religious generation alive in the UK. But when I know, that's a wow. When I dove in to actually find the study that they were quoting, they were just asking, do you believe in God? And it wasn't even like a very specific definition of God. It's not, do you believe in a God of the Bible or a Christian God or anything like that? Just, do you believe in God? And Gen Z had the highest percentage. It was 37% of Gen Z said, I believe in God. And that was compared to other generations, which ranged between 25 to 32%. And I thought, what a misleading headline. You just said that they're the most religious. And what it really was a very flat question of, do you believe in God? And who knows what God they're talking about when they say yes to that. Right. So I appreciate that David Kinnaman out of Barna has said, hey, we've seen engagement with the Bible, but it's yet to be said if they're believing what they're reading. We know they're reading it. We don't know if they're believing it. So all that's kind of swirling in the mix. And when people say, but what do you see? You're actually with high school students. What do you see? And I say, look, we are still having a barrier of very, very low trust. We're in a low trust culture. They do not trust adults. They don't trust institutions. So we are still in that space where we have to move past that and earn trust before we can even have those conversations.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that point about low trust. So one of the key points in your book, you talk about reinterpreting or reframing questions that Gen Z would have. And before I even think, before I have you answer that question, I think I want to hear more from you about how you even engender trust within young people, because they're not going to ask you questions if they don't trust you, right?
Yeah, I think we've all been tested by a young person in our life where they kind of feel you out. They might say something to see if it will shock you, right? Or if you will continue to like them after they say something. We watch them kind of.
Look, my daughter does that. I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, our kids absolutely did that. Actually, my 10-year-old did that last night. He just shared a little piece of information just to see how I would react to it, So they're always doing that. But I think what I appreciate about our Gen Zers is that they realize that trust has a value to it. And so instead of just give it away and hope that it works out, or is what previous generations would do, say, I'll trust you until you prove you can't be trusted. Mm-hmm. They're actually saying, no, it's too valuable to give away in this world right now. So let me wait and see. Are you consistent in who you are? Are you authentic? Do I feel like I see the bumps and bruises along with the bright, shiny pictures.
Yeah.
All those pieces. Every kid is different. Every young person is different. Every young person is different. So, but they're waiting and watching according to see if you're consistent, authentic, honest, and ultimately that means trustworthy.
So I'm trying to find the quote here, but for sake of time, I'm thinking about, I recently read Tim Keller's book, How to Reach the West, where he talks about, if I'm remembering the quote, questioning people's answers. And I thought about a MI or motivational interviewing approach to evangelism, kind of thinking through that logic. You similarly write in your book about reinterpreting or reframing Gen Z questions. Do you want to give us an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, and this is really mostly cultural apologetics, right? It's understanding what is the culture asking and how does God interact with those questions? How does the gospel answer the questions within that culture? So, for example, I'd say this, like one of the questions that we start off in the book is God good? Which is a timeless question, right? Timeless. Yeah. I mean, and you're probably not going to hear a young person say that. It'll be rephrased like, why would God let this happen? Why did God do this? It's the old, why do bad things happen to good people question,
Right.
And I think it's a mistake if we automatically go, well, I asked that question and I found an answer. I'll just give the answer that was good for me,
Yeah.
Instead of saying, where's the question coming from our Gen Zers? What lens are they asking it through? And with the high rates of loneliness, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, suicide itself, like all those things are coming. Then as you can imagine as a young person that when they're saying, man, is God good? Or like, I am scared. I am alone. I don't know what's going on. Does God even know what's happening to me? Does he see what I'm dealing with? Will he do anything about it? And that becomes a question that is a pain question through how they're experiencing pain in their generational experience. And so we have to answer it with that in mind, not with what was good for me.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most interesting things as I think about it, at least, like the cultural scripts that we've utilized, and I use a big we here, Christianity in the last 80 years to evangelize. Like, I just gave a presentation at a church last week on this, and I was talking about how, like, when I was very early, long time ago, in college, trying to practice evangelism, it was like the Billy Graham script of like, very rooted in Christendom, like, do you know the 10 Commandments? Are you a sinner? If you die tonight, do you know where you'd go? Like that script doesn't work anymore. And then there was like, for a little bit of time, this script of like you kind of alluded to, they're like, if you could just answer their questions, right? Like to answer for them, like how you overcame like the question of, is God good, right? But what I appreciate so much in your book and some of these other stuff I'm reading is like, not that we need to dismiss those practices, but recognize the new cultural context we're in. So again, I'm thinking about, you talk about these generational values and this disconnect that older generations have to this younger generations of these values of acceptance and belonging, not meaning what we older folks think they mean. So talk through that disconnect, if you would.
I mean, there's probably a number of stories you've heard or people listening have experienced where someone's saying, you don't accept me. And you're like, no, I do accept you. But no, you're not accepting me. You don't accept me for who I am. And so what we're actually running into is that we're working with a different definition of acceptance. So one person's like, you can do this with anything, right? I am respecting, you're disrespectful. No, I am respecting you, because those are cultural ideas on how those are expressed. And so we have to recognize that our generations have their own little cultures that we're working up against. So our young people have been raised in a moment where acceptance does go along with belonging. If you accept me, I belong. But that's defined as if you agree with me, then you accept me. But if you disagree with me, you don't, which is different for this generation than previous generations. Right. And acceptance is saying, if you accept me, you'll never ask me to change, which is also a problematic idea of what acceptance is. And it's actually a rather unbiblical idea of what acceptance is.
So let's talk through that, because I want to hear more this idea of, because there's the idea of the belong let me get it right, belong, behave, believe, right? That kind of metaphor or that kind of framework, which I think really makes a lot of sense in Christian context, and I've seen it work. So how do we offer young people a space to let them know that they belong, but also like we're expecting growth from them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I work in mostly outreach ministry, and then I'm a part of a local church, and we were discipling kids as they go along, and so there's lots of different ways that people are approaching this, and different ministries are approaching this. But the idea of belonging, I mean, that's just a human need. Like we want to belong, but the idea of how does this young person, how to make them feel accepted and belong, like they belong in my world. That's a different space, right? There's a lot of books on this, and I've read a lot of content on it. One even said, belonging is if you know my name and you're excited when you see me, and you notice when I'm not there. Which I was like, oh, I like that. But But I've also seen when you're excited to see me is wonderful, right? When you're excited to see me, we all love that. I love when you walk in the door and someone goes, Lauren's here. Now the party can start. You're here. Okay, sit down. Tell me everything about your day today.
First of all, no one says when Loren is here, the party can start. Nobody.
I'd have to cry for help. Someone needs to say that to you.
I mean, I just got back from a conference last night, and my son had been texting me like 8 years old. Dad, I miss you. Dad, I miss you. And then I get home and he's just upstairs playing on his computer, his iPad. I'm like, son, hello, I'm here. Do you want to see me? So I'm sorry. I'm sharing emotional baggage here with you, but continue about belonging.
Oh, well, I mean, that's constant. We're going to be curious about our young people. And I think the Bible does a great job of showing this, what this looks like, that Jesus asked questions, that he listened to people, that he went into their worlds, that he went into places that most people would have looked at and said, why are you going there? Don't you know who hangs out there? And then didn't let people stay where they were. I mean, I love his questions that he asks and the challenges he puts in front of people, all constantly. And so I think we get to do that with our Gen Zers. Ask questions, be curious, listen a lot, and love them and celebrate the things that reflect the image of God that you see in them. Yeah.
I want to read a quote you have in your book about being a neighbor as an alternative or Christian alternative to Gen Z values. You write, being a neighbor is loving others, which is a form of acceptance. Love facilitates and cultivates belonging. Love is more powerful than acceptance. It makes a way for acceptance, but does not require agreement. And love can make us want to change for the better. Jesus instructs us to love our neighbors in the same way that we love ourselves. So obviously, that's sort of a longer quote, but it gets at this theme that I think you try to do in the book, which I appreciate, of, again, reframing or reinterpreting these Gen Z values in line with scriptural values.
Yeah. I mean, if every person, reflects the image of God, that means every generation and every culture reflects some aspect of the image of God. And we all do reflect distortions. Let's be clear. There is sin in the world, but it's fun to get to look at our next generation or just the young person in front of you and pray and go, Lord, where are they reflecting your image, that I can call it out and draw it out and actually help better reflect your image in the world.
One other thing that I really appreciate about the book is you talk about Gen Z seeing a more broader, less individualized view of the world and certainly religion. You write that when talking to Gen Z, they understand God's restoration as more vast and awesome, and that while personal faith is important to Gen Z, they have a collective expectation of God. Talk more about, I'm curious, like what that looks like in a faith or in a local church context or in a ministry context, because again, like I can't remember where I got. Oh, Christian Smith, Why Religion Went Obsolete, talks about one of the weaknesses, especially in evangelical Christianity, is we've kind of made faith about me and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Gen Z, if I'm understanding you correctly, gets at an important aspect of broadening this faith between just me and Jesus. Talk more about what you think that looks like, though, in a local church setting or ministry setting.
Yeah, and I really appreciate this about Gen Z, that they're like, well, why does it matter in the world? Like, what difference does following Jesus or does God make in what's happening in the world around us? And yeah, Kristen Smith's not alone in saying that. Almeda Wright has a book on the spiritual lives of young African Americans, and she says the Sunday school curriculum for Black churches has focused on personal relationship with Jesus, and that doesn't explain or deal with what our young people are dealing with in the world. So where are we going to connect it from not just me and God, but how does that now go horizontal, right? What are the hands and feet pieces of this and again, we have to make that concrete connection for our young people. They don't just get to hear a sermon or a Sunday school lesson that just says, hey, be a good neighbor. That's too abstract. We need to give them practices, and we need to do it together with them. So the church can offer opportunities where we're saying, hey, where do we want to be neighbors? And I think that should be a group conversation. I don't think it's a group, like a small people in the room saying, we're going to go do the soup kitchen next week. But a bunch of people saying, hey, what's important to you? Because the Lord's speaking to all of us, and get to say and we're all differently gifted. And what if the things that we took on as a church reflected those different gifts of the people that are in there? And so if you do have people that want to do conservation in their local community, or help with the animal shelter, or work at the gospel rescue mission with those who are homeless, or volunteer with the preschools that need extra hands, we have lots of things. And that ultimately, what we're coaching people is like, this should be an expression of your relationship with Jesus, how he made you and the values that he has instilled to be expressed, so that when you go and you become a crossing guard for the elementary school, that they say, why do you do this? And you say, because I follow Jesus and he's asked me to serve the people around me.
Yeah, I love that you bring in that foundational aspect of it, because I think that's something that I've seen mistaken, or I don't know if that's the right word of saying it, but not emphasized perhaps is another way of saying it, because I think when our actions are not rooted in our faith, then it becomes really easy to forget why we're doing something. Let me say it this way. I think the overarching value in our culture, at least, is like, if it feels good, do it. And there's a lot of things, a lot of times that doing the right thing doesn't feel good, right? Like how do you then shift that? How do you shift that mindset in young people when they're trained? Like, hey, like if it feels good, do it. If it doesn't feel good, like it's wrong. Like it's almost inverse, right, of what Christianity. What I'm preaching here now. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. I'm soapboxing. This is supposed to be your time.
No, but this is good, because I think we can't assume that our next generation has that value in their brain. And so we do have to unpack it. And they may have it in their heart as far as like, do you want to stay the same person forever? No. Would you like to grow? Yes. Do you want to do things like harder things than you're doing right now? What do you want to be able to do? What are the characteristics you would like to be known for? They have all this stuff. And then the lie that we uncover for them is that our world has told them. It's not them coming up with it. The world has told them, if it hurts, if it costs you, if you have to give up something to do it, whether it's sleep or rest or, doing the hobby you wanted to do or whatever it is, like if it costs you something, then you shouldn't do it. That's unfair. And the reality is that's the only way that community exists. That's the only way relationships exist, and helping them process through those pieces of going, of course it costs something. Like if we have a whole world that says, you come to me because I'm not going to go to you, then no one's going to each other. No one's going anywhere.
Well, I feel like that's the thing of modern relationships, right? I mean, just from an outside observer, thank God I'm not having to navigate modern relationships right now, but it feels like everybody's just saying, you should come to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not working. Turns out we have the highest rates of loneliness in history. And so we get, again, it's baby steps. It's saying, hey, this week, do something that you don't that you're like too tired and kind of don't want to do, within reason. All right, we're not talking about abusive situations and things like that, but like you take the extra, snack to school and find someone to give it to, the show up for someone's game and cheer for them when you are kind of too tired to, those kinds of things, like where you go, what if you just did that once a week and saw what that was like? Did you ever do sports, Loren? Were you ever?
Yes.
Yeah. What was your sport of choice?
I mean, basketball, cross country.
Okay, those are highly aerobic, right? Like,
right.
Those workouts hurt. Those conditioning workouts, everything hurts.
That's why I was not a good runner for the vast majority of my high school. I didn't really actually want to run.
No, but when we talk about that and say, if my coach never pushed me to a place where the workout, like it hurt my lungs or my muscles were sore the next day, or they said, go do one more rep of this. And you're like, I cannot move anymore, but you get up and you go do it one more time. If they never did those things, we would never progress as an athlete. Actually, our muscles would probably start to become weaker and weaker over time because we never did anything that made them stronger. And I say, we are just like that. Our brains are like that. Our emotions are like that. Our grit is like that. So we have to lean into the things that push us just a little further than where we would have ever been before.
So I just used this metaphor in another conversation, and I hear the same thing. Like, this is what I feel like for our current cultural context, that in many ways we are like missionaries to the culture. And I know like that word has baggage for good reason in some contexts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do you see, like, do you think that metaphor makes sense when we think about the work we're trying to do within a de-Christianized culture, especially among young people?
Yeah, I mean, it's the old, you're not a citizen of this world. You're a citizen of heaven. It's, as soon as you follow Jesus Christ, as soon as you give your life over or become, any of the verbiage we want to use to express the mystery of becoming a follower of God. Once you do that, your citizenship changes. This is not your home anymore. And so it's always going to feel a little uncomfortable. It's always going to push on you a little bit funny ways. You're never going to feel like totally belong here. And that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah. I wanted to ask this earlier, but I need to ask this now so I don't forget. But you hinted at this already, this idea that like we want to blame Gen Z, we want to blame Gen Z for all their problems. And I remember like thinking about this when I think we're around the same ilk, right? Generationally, like when we were young and everybody was blaming like Gen X or boomers for like the participation trophy thing, right? Like, I guess what I'm getting at is also like we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say like we're the ones who, I don't want to say allowed this to happen, but like they're learning from us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's a combination of things, like so one of the values that's very high for Gen Z, one of their highest values is the value of safety. And people often ask me, like, where did that come from? And I said, we raised them with it. They didn't come up with it on their own. They've been told to be safe their entire lives by mostly their Gen X parents who grew up in a time when we saw kids' faces on milk cartons and stranger danger became a thing. And all of a sudden the narrative was people want to hurt kids. So now take that group of people and make them parents. And what do we want to do? We don't want them to have to deal with the things that we did. Yeah, I'm a Gen Xer. Yeah, we do like to brag about how tough we were and all these things. But at the end of the day, I mean, the term latchkey kid was a term thrown around in the 80s. We don't use that term anymore, but that was like, oh, that kid, they don't have parents home, for them. Or whatever things we wanted to throw that were around in the 80s. We wanted to protect our kids from experiencing the different emotional things that we experienced, the physical danger we experienced, and it's gone on beyond that. And so they were really raised with that. And then there's just stuff like, it's not, we did not know what smartphones were going to do. We didn't know what social media was going to do. We were all learning at the same time. We just happened to learn it alongside of our children who had the same devices in their hands. And I think if we went back in time when we knew what we know now, we would have done it differently, but we didn't know. We had no idea.
Well, this brings to mind, and I'm sure you're familiar with, right, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And when I read that book, certainly like all the things about like, oh, we need to have, speaking of safety, we probably need to have more safety around content moderation and device usage and all that. But the thing that I felt was really lacking, and I'm curious your thoughts here on it, like it felt like to me like he couldn't quite recognize like that. I think what's really like the hole in people, what they're trying to fill with smartphones, with social media, is like meaning and purpose, and certainly I believe like God. Do you, like, when you think about interacting with parents, not just the young people, but parents, do you see that, like, I don't want to say mistake, but misunderstanding? I'm not sure which word to say. Like this idea that like, if I can just control everything or build the right environments for them, they'll be successful. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know if I run into that as much. I mean, that's probably a specific demographic of parent that is wrestling with those specific ideas. There is happening right now is a shift in parenting style. So the parents of Gen Alpha who witnessed what went on with Gen Z, where we tried to keep Gen Z so safe that they weren't in the physical world and yet not in the online world.
Right.
And saw all the results that happen. The research is starting to come out that Gen Alpha parents are having these conversations much earlier. So to say, well, I can't really protect them from everything. So how do I prepare them? Which is more like what Gen Xers kind of grew up with, which is, hey, like, we can't keep you safe. The world's not safe. So let me show you how to engage with it so that you are at least prepared for it. So much earlier conversations about gun violence, internet safety, mental health, things like pornography, they're being talked about in a much younger age by parents these days.
Yeah. I want to talk just generally about youth ministry in general for a moment, if I may. Like, one thing that I've noticed, and I'm curious, like, it seems like, and again, this is purely anecdotal from my part, that it seems like in church youth groups, like, the middle schoolers are there, but the high schoolers, like, I was trained in youth ministry a long time ago, right? And there's this idea, like, the real challenges was once they graduate from high school, keeping them engaged in college. Tell me if I'm wrong, but something I'm noticing is like once they're basically in high school, they're checking out from church. Are you noticing the same trend?
You know, there's some reports that say that from different research places that they are, and that actually at younger ages, they're starting to depart the church. But again, since my context is primarily outreach ministry in in practice, you know, I don't get to see those things as much. The reports that are out there from places like, you know, Pew Research and Springtide and other research places have shown that younger people leaving the church at a younger age. And then the reports are coming out in the last year. So it's kind of yet to see what happens in the next few years of if our young people are re-engaging and then staying in those places.
Fair enough. Let me ask this. If you were in charge of like a youth ministry at a church and your real focus was outreach, like what are like one or two, three things you would start doing immediately? What are a couple things you'd stop doing?
You know, I was writing an article recently and I asked some Gen Zers in my life, I said, what do you want church leaders to know? You know, they're asking me. And one of the first responses I got was, stop teaching us that evangelism is just inviting our friends to church. And
wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm here for it.
I know. He said, you're not actually teaching us how to share my faith. Like, I want to be taught on how to have a conversation with my friend. Like, what should I ask them? What am I supposed to share? What is the gospel and how can I explain it? You know? And I was like, what an incredible, request, and so easy to meet, actually.
Yeah.
To say, let me show you how to actually share the gospel with your friends. And I'd start with first, can you share your testimony? Like if someone asked you, why do you follow God? Or even just like, why are you a positive person? You don't have to actually wait for a very God-specific question. Can you share your testimony or your life story, your journey in 3 to 4 sentences? Can you do that? And I would start having our young people practice sharing their own story, write it down, practice with one another, share it with one another. Because I think there's plenty of kids who are in different youth ministries that don't know each other's stories. They don't know why each other are following Jesus, and start there. I think the reminder that, I'm going to get weepy on this, Jesus changes our lives, gets lost in that. And when they're reminded that they've got a whole bunch of hurting peers who would die to be where they are, that it becomes less scary to think I'm imposing my religious belief on someone, and instead thinking I am offering a lifeline to someone who's desperately looking for one.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Anything churches should not or should stop doing, should not be doing?
Oh my gosh. I feel like that's such a wide net there. It's, when someone asks you a question, your brain, it's like when someone says, how can I pray for you? And your brain ultimately floods with so many things that you can't even get your brain like set. There's so many things. What would churches stop doing? Stop isolating our adolescents in another room and not talking to them.
Love it. Good.
Is that too much?
No, I think that's great. Anything else to say here while I'm thinking on that topic?
I think that our young people are looking for authenticity. They've told us this a number of times. And sometimes, I wonder about things like when we're worshiping, how, and if the worship team looks like they're half asleep and straight faced and you're like, I can't tell if you're excited to be here or not. Like, I can't tell if you believe what's going on. So I think there's a piece of really going, hey, do kids believe, do our young people believe that we believe what we're singing about? And here's the silliest, dumbest one, right? I just think name tags are helpful. I think name tags are helpful. I think we've got greeters. I love our greeters, but I'm like, if there's people you see all the time and you're like, I've seen this person for 3 months. I do not remember their name, and it stops conversation, especially for our young people. If someone who's a grandma or grandpa or, in their 40s or 30s or whatever can see a young person with their name on their name tag, it does actually help them go up and say, hey, Loren, how's it going? And it actually helps the young person not feel like that they can also engage because they're not having to guess at what your name is. It sounds silly, but I feel like it works.
You've used my name here, I think at least 3 times in the conversation. And I imagine that's purposeful. And I've noticed it. And I feel like, Tanita, I know you better because you're using my name. You'd made me feel like I'm mad that I'm not just some rando podcast host that you're talking to and are going to forget. That's the power of naming people that I'm experiencing right now. So thank you for that. You're demonstrating it and practicing it right now. I do want to ask before we move on for closing questions here, certainly church and Christianity gets a bad rap in some contexts. You and I would both agree, church has done its fair share of harm that I think we can 100% agree, we need to fix that. We need to stop doing that. That being said, I think alone, the sociological data is shockingly clear that church is good for young people. How have you, what does that look like for you? Do you try to talk about that when you're talking to young people or donors? How do you engage with statistics like that?
It always depends on who I'm talking with about it. I think for one part, there's a number of especially young people, but a lot of our culture that do not know that some of the practices that we would consider moral and important today originated with the church, right? That they don't know that, that things like, hospitals or education being made available for everybody, adoption, these are things that originated in the church. And so there's a lot of that people don't know where it came from, and that's there. I think it's powerful that, like you mentioned, Jonathan Haidt, that in his book he says, "Look, I'm an atheist, right? Or at least he's not practicing of any religion he was, but faith communities are massively important for young people. They should be involved with the faith community." Having a testimony like that is like, that's incredible that this person sees that. There's a number of sources that talk about that being a part of a faith community does alleviate some of the things that impact mental health for young people. It's not a cure for mental health, not saying if you're a believer, you don't experience mental health difficulties, but that it actually does build some resilience within our young people, along with community and belonging and alleviating some of the loneliness that they feel. That, funnily enough, as you start to look at the statistics, what comes to light? God created us to know him and be in community with one another. And that, I think, is what's reflected in the statistics ultimately.
Well, let's move on to some closing questions. The book is What Gen Z Really Wants to Know About God. Thanks for this conversation. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Tanita Maddox. Thank you so much for the conversation. If you were Pope for a day, what would you want to do with that day?
Oh my gosh. You're asking a Presbyterian what I would do if I was Pope for the day? I feel like you should pick a different public figure.
Well, it's meant to be understood as like, if I had ultimate control over Christianity for one day. So think about this: like if you had, if you could call the shots for youth ministry, perhaps for one day, what would one thing you would institute as if you're Pope, perhaps?
Oh, well, I'm really glad I'm not, because that feels really overwhelming to try to do that. I think that, I think you're asking, how would I change things right now if I could, right? Like, what would I do?
Yeah.
I would pray and call other people to pray specifically and desperately for our young people and for one another and for the people they don't understand and for the people they don't like to be around. And seek deeply how to see how God's image is reflected in each person, whether that it just needs to be emphasized or it's under a sea of junk that they can't even see it for themselves and we can show it to them.
Wow, that's good. That's good. A theologian or historical Christian figure you want to meet or bring back to life?
What's interesting? This is kind of a deep pull, but I did a paper on Saint Cyprian, like a long time ago.
Oh, that is a deep pull.
I know. But what fascinates me about him is to live in a spot where the church is being divided over persecution. And as that is happening and moves on to a different season, you have to figure out how to reconcile the Christians who lost people to martyrdom and the people who somehow maybe lied about their faith or renounced it, but maybe, in order to live. And you have to figure how to put them back together. And that could be really similar to some of the things we experience today of how do you take a divided church that's deeply pained, like there's real loss and hurt, and figure out how do you help this group of people move forward together.
Wow. That's a good answer. That's a good answer. What will history remember from our current time and place?
I think the digital movement is I think all the things that are happening digitally is a big marker because it's actually changing how the world works right now.
Yeah.
I think, we talked about a little bit about Gen Z, but when we talk about Gen Z, we're talking about Gen Z around the world because it's the first really global generation. We've never had one like this before, that the same term is used everywhere, and that also there's a lot of similar characteristics and pieces. But some of the reason this movement is happening is because of technology, because they have access to things, because they can, make things happen with clicks of buttons. I think that will be part of it. We'll remember how technology changed kind of everything.
Yeah. What do you hope then for the future of Christianity?
I hope we more and more reflect the kingdom of heaven on earth. I think that one of the gifts of studying and practicing cultural apologetics is we're trying to do our best to share about the mysteries of God in our specific point of history and our specific culture that we're in. And it has made me look with kinder eyes on our church history when we read things that we say, oh, they totally got it wrong. They were like way off, and go, oh my goodness, they were doing their best to try to capture the mysteries of God in that moment. And they get it wrong. And I will absolutely get it wrong. I have gotten it wrong. And so I think just if we can keep trying our best to reflect the image of God and the kingdom of God on earth, that's the best that we can do.
These have been good answers here. It's been good answers. I mean, I think, man, if we could have a day, man, the day to pray for young people and those with whom we disagree with, like, if we all committed to doing that for a day, like, holy smokes, we could get some revival out of that. I believe that. Obviously, folks I'll make sure to put a link for the book in the show notes. Is there any, how can people find out more about you and connect with you?
You can reach me through Instagram at Dr. Tanita Maddox or through my website, tanitamaddox.com. There's a bunch of free resources, and you can actually reach me directly through both of those places.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your forthrightness and engagement with me. And like I said, like I feel like you've, using my name, I feel like that's just a great example that we can all practice. Like when you call each other by name, I mean, I think there's something biblical about that. So thank you again for your conversation. I'm glad we could make this work. We always leave someone with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
And also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Resonate Media. We love to hear from our listeners with questions, comments, and ideas for future episodes. Visit our website at future-christian.com and find the Connect with Us form at the bottom of the page to get in touch with Martha or Loren. But before you go, do us a favor. Subscribe to the pod to leave a review. It really helps us get this out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.